The Encounters of a Cryptozoologist, the Devil Bird. Hi, my name is Trent, and I like to consider myself something of a cryptozoologist. Before diving into the stories, I want to take a moment to explain what cryptozoology is for those who might not be familiar, and also share how I found my way into this unusual line of work. Cryptozoology is essentially the study of animals or creatures whose existence hasn't been scientifically confirmed, at least not yet. Classic examples include Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. But cryptozoology also covers animals reported in places they shouldn't naturally inhabit, or species believed to be extinct that might still be out there, hidden from modern science. The field is deeply rooted in the animal sciences, with a focus on proving the reality of these elusive beings. That said, my own approach goes a little further. While I have a strong interest in the animal-based side of cryptozoology, I also branch into the realms of the supernatural, things like ghosts, aliens, and demons, which are typically outside the scope of traditional cryptozoology. As for how I got started in this field, I come from a family with significant wealth, enough that if I ever chose to have children, even their great-grandchildren would never need to work. I don't say this to brag, but rather to give you some context. Growing up, I actually resented having money. People often treated me differently because of it, and it made it difficult to form genuine friendships, ones that weren't based on my having the latest toys or the best video games. This lack of trust and companionship in my childhood drove me toward the unknown. I became obsessed with the mysterious, particularly the idea that there are places on Earth where incomprehensible creatures might exist. I spent much of my youth reading and researching, trying to understand these hidden corners of the world. Once I was old enough, I decided to pursue this passion through field research, funded, of course, by my family's wealth. This series of stories will chronicle the encounters and strange experiences I've had during my investigations. One of my first field investigations focused on the legend of the Sri Lankan devil bird, locally known as the ulama. According to local folklore, the devil bird is believed to be the tormented soul of someone who fled into the forest and ended their life in anguish. Stories vary. Some say it was a husband who discovered the butchered remains of his family. Others claim it was a grieving mother tricked into eating the flesh of her own child. Now, I don't usually put too much faith in folklore without some form of evidence. After all, my work aims to uncover what's real, not just what's told. But in this line of work, you sometimes witness things that defy explanation. So, while I remain skeptical, I always keep an open mind. The ulama is said to emit one of the most disturbing cries imaginable, a sound that leaves people shaken to their core. Interestingly, while many have claimed to hear this unearthly screech, no one has ever definitively seen the creature behind it. That paradox is what drew me in. When I arrived in Sri Lanka, I hired a local guide named Sandun. He had grown up in the villages near the areas where most reports of the ulama's cries had originated, and he knew the surrounding forest well. That gave me some confidence that we wouldn't end up lost in unfamiliar terrain. Now, I imagine some of you might picture me as a pampered rich guy hiring a guide just to carry my gear. Let me clear that up. I may have used my family's money to fund my research, but I've always done the majority of the physical work myself. I also make sure to pay people like Sandun extremely well, because I'm well aware that many of them live in hardship. Over the years, I've witnessed things, some natural, some not, that still haunt my dreams. Those experiences have given me a deeper understanding of the world and of people in particular. Not all my stories involve mysterious creatures. Some of the most terrifying ones involve humans. Back to the expedition. Sandun laid out the plan. It would take us just over 2 days of trekking through the forest to reach a remote location where he'd heard numerous ulama stories. Once there, we'd spend 2 days exploring and investigating the area, followed by the 2-day hike back. To be safe, we packed 2 weeks' worth of rations in case something unexpected happened along the way. The 2-day trek through the tropical forest was, for the most part, what you'd expect: dense, humid, and full of surprises. I woke up on the first morning with an ivory ornamental tarantula resting casually on my sleeping bag, and later that day I had to burn a leech off my leg after crossing a small river. Still, the discomforts were worth it when I saw a herd of Sri Lankan elephants making their way across a sunlit plain, a breathtaking sight I'll never forget. Eventually, we reached our target location and set up camp for the first night. As we dug into our rations, Sandun, absolute legend, pulled a 6-pack of beer from his pack. He'd snuck it along for our arrival, and after that tarantula incident, I definitely needed one. We sat by the fire, sharing stories. Sandun told me about his 3-year-old daughter, Lisha, and how much he adored his wife. His face lit up when he spoke about them. It was clear his world revolved around his family. I started telling him about my own upbringing, about the wealth and the distance it had created between me and my family. I admitted how I wished we were even half as close as his seemed to be. But then I stopped. Something wasn't right. If you've ever been in a tropical forest at night, you'll know it's never truly quiet. The jungle is alive with noise, birds calling, insects chirping, predators announcing themselves or pursuing prey. But at that moment, there was silence. Not a single chirp or rustle, just the fire crackling in front of us. Then, cutting through the stillness, came the faint sound of a child whimpering. It was soft like a distant sob, enough to send a chill down your spine. Sandun immediately froze. I heard him mutter, barely above a whisper, "Lisha, no, not possible." And then he bolted toward the sound. I scrambled to follow, but the forest at night is a beast of its own. In no time, I lost sight of him in the darkness. That's when the single whimper transformed, no, erupted, into a chorus of screams. Agonizing, horrifying screams that seemed to come from every direction at once. I don't know how to describe them, but I'll try. Imagine someone enduring unimaginable pain, their voice strained and raw, but warped, as though they were choking on their own blood while crying out. It felt like the forest itself was wailing. I collapsed to my knees, overwhelmed, hands over my ears trying to shut it out. Just when I thought I couldn't take anymore, Sandun burst through the trees, grabbed me, and hauled me up. "The ulama is not happy we are here. We must go now," he shouted, dragging me with him through the forest. As we stumbled away, I looked back. That's when I saw them, 2 glowing crimson eyes, staring straight at us from the dark. They pierced through the night, filled with something unnatural. I can't tell you with certainty that it was the devil bird. It could have been a trick of the firelight or just my fear playing with my mind. But whatever it was, it reached deep into my core and unearthed a terror I had never known before. As soon as we made it back to camp, we grabbed our gear and left. Right then, in the dead of night, without a second thought about the other dangers that might be lurking in the forest. Sandun didn't say a single word the entire journey back, but it wasn't fear or anger I sensed from him. It was something heavier, sadness and deep, haunting worry. Somehow, we made the return trip in just 1 day, cutting our original time in half. We didn't stop, didn't rest, didn't speak. The forest seemed to give way to us, as if even it didn't want us there anymore. When we finally reached Sandun's village, he didn't pause. He rushed straight to his home. Not knowing where else to go, I followed. We stepped into his house to find his wife in tears and the small, still form of a child lying on the bed. There's a part of the devil bird legend I didn't mention before. In Sri Lankan folklore, the cry of the ulama isn't just eerie, it's considered a death omen. It turns out that Lisha, Sandun's daughter, had come down with a fever the very day we left on our expedition. Within 2 days, it had overtaken her fragile body. She was too young, and nothing could be done to save her. I tried to offer help, anything I could do, But Sandun just looked at me with a hollow expression and asked in a monotone voice to leave and never return. "I cannot handle another great loss," he said. On the way home, still shaken and exhausted, I received a call from my father. One of my aunts had died in a car accident. The crash had occurred on the very same night I heard the llama's chilling cry in the forest. The rational part of me, the scientist, wants to say it was all a coincidence. A mind-bending, extraordinary coincidence, but a coincidence nonetheless. Still, after locking eyes with whatever that thing was in the forest, I can't fully dismiss the possibility that Sandun and I disturbed something ancient. Something that was never meant to be seen, and we paid a price for it. The reason I'm sharing this story, and others like it, is because I've never been officially recognized in the cryptozoology community. I conduct my research independently, using my own resources, and not for fame or scientific accolades. I do this for the truth, and while I may not have credentials or a peer-reviewed paper, I do have experiences. Experiences I know some of you will believe. That's why I'm here, sharing what I've seen. The Encounters of a Cryptozoologist, Kappa. I know I've been incredibly fortunate to see as much of the world as I have, but even with that privilege, there are times when I question the path I've chosen, especially after some of the things I've experienced. More than once, I've put myself in serious danger and nearly didn't make it back. What I'm about to share is one of those close calls. To begin, let me explain the creature I had chosen to research during this particular journey, the kappa. In Japanese folklore, kappas are often described as mischievous, imp-like water creatures. They're known for their intelligence, which they seem to take great joy in using for pranks and trickery. The severity of their pranks varies greatly depending on the story. Some describe them as harmless nuisances, cutting the lines of fishermen, while others speak of far darker acts like luring children to the water's edge and drowning them. Kappas are classified as aquatic cryptids, but are said to occasionally venture onto land in search of mischief, or their favorite food, of all things, cucumbers. Yes, actual cucumbers. According to legend, kappas are obsessed with them. Oddly enough, their diet is said to consist exclusively of cucumbers and, more disturbingly, the flesh of children. Descriptions of kappas typically portray them as being about the size of a small child, with greenish skin and features resembling a strange cross between an ape and a frog. That's the legend, but for me, this particular expedition wasn't about proving the kappa's existence. I was actually trying to disprove it. My research focused on traveling to various aquatic environments across Japan to study and catalog populations of the Japanese giant salamander, a creature I believe is the most likely origin of the kappa myth. From a zoological standpoint, the salamander fits many aspects of the kappa's appearance and aquatic behavior. And frankly, I believe that if the kappa were a real creature, with the kind of intelligence folklore suggests, it would have been formally identified by now within the scientific community. I should probably mention something I left out of my last post. I do hold a degree in zoology, and I'm more than qualified to conduct this kind of research. However, I rarely publish my findings. My work doesn't get much traction, mostly because I'm not well known within the cryptozoology community. And to be honest, I've never quite fit in there either. My views and methods tend to clash with the more traditional believers. By this point in my research, I had traveled extensively through the regions where Japanese giant salamanders are most commonly found, and I was getting promising results. Their populations were healthy, and many of their physical traits closely aligned with the traditional depictions of the kappa in folklore. At this stage, I had made my way to Tokushima, just north of Mount Takagiyama. I was working along a river deep within the forest and had already captured and documented 2 salamanders. I was in the middle of photographing the second one and preparing to release it back into the water when I heard a splash, fairly sizable, coming from farther out toward the center of the river. Now, this happened to be one of the few times I didn't have a guide or partner with me. I hadn't considered this trip particularly dangerous, so I had chosen to go it alone. Curious about the splash, I moved toward the sound, quickly noticing the riverbed was sloping deeper. By the time I thought I was near where the splash had occurred, the water was up to my upper abdomen, and the muddy bottom made footing increasingly difficult. I began to search the area, hoping maybe another salamander had surfaced. But then I heard another splash, this one even further out. I knew I was already pushing it by being in water this deep, especially alone, but the sound had piqued my curiosity. Japan isn't known for having large aquatic animals inland, so anything unusual was worth investigating. By the time I reached the spot where I thought the second splash had come from, I was chest deep in water. I searched briefly but decided I was too far out and it was time to head back. As I began turning around, I heard yet another splash, this one farther still. I turned to glance in that direction, but it was too far, too risky to justify going any further. So I turned and began carefully making my way back toward the riverbank. That's when it happened. I felt a sudden tug, a tight, deliberate pressure on my leg. Before I could even register what was happening, I was yanked under the water and dragged violently along the muddy riverbed. Panic surged through me. I fought with everything I had, flailing and kicking, trying to break free. I managed to twist my body just enough to look back, and that's when I saw it. A hand, a humanoid hand, gripping my ankle tightly. Its skin was greenish, slick like an amphibian's, and long, claw-like nails extended from the fingers. Whatever had hold of me wasn't a fish, and it hadn't bitten me. It was dragging me with intent. It was no accident. I wasn't prey. I was being taken. I kept fighting, kicking, twisting, clawing at the murky water for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably no more than a minute or two. But when you're drowning, time becomes warped. You start to feel every second like it's an eternity. People often talk about drowning as darkness creeping into your vision, and that part is true. But what I've rarely heard anyone describe accurately is what it does to your chest. It's not like holding your breath. It's a crushing, overwhelming pressure, like your lungs are being twisted inward while something tries to burst out of you at the same time. It's excruciating, like you're being pulled apart from the inside. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another second, the pain began to fade. What came next shocked me. There was this strange euphoria, a surreal calm that flooded through me. It's bizarre, going from the worst physical sensation of your life to something I can only describe as the best feeling in the world, a warmth, peace, like I was letting go, and okay with it. That's the last thing I remember before blacking out. In that moment, I fully believed it was the end, and I didn't even care. When I came to, I was on a boat, getting mouth to mouth from a 70-year-old Japanese man while a shirtless younger guy stood beside him, soaked and gasping for air. I sat up, coughing what felt like an entire river out of my lungs. Later, once we got to the hospital, a nurse helped translate the young man's account. My Japanese wasn't good enough at the time to follow it on my own. According to him, he and his grandfather had been fishing when they suddenly noticed a strange disturbance just beneath their boat. He said he glimpsed the faint shapes of two figures, both human-sized, but one was just floating while the other was. He paused, struggling to describe it, before settling on something between swimming and dancing around the other. That's when he dove in, straight into the water, and swam toward me. As he approached, the second figure retreated into the depths. He managed to pull me onto the boat, where his grandfather immediately started CPR. Those two men saved my life, without a doubt. Now, I don't know what had grabbed me, but I no longer believe it was a kappa. For one thing, the young man kept repeating a word during his explanation, akuma, and more importantly, he described the figure as being adult-sized, far larger than the childlike kappa from the legends. I eventually asked the nurse what akuma meant. She paused, looked at me with wide eyes, and said simply, demon. Then she hurried back to her shift without another word. The Encounters of a Cryptozoologist, the Amazon. This story is a difficult one for me to tell. Even now, as I sit here trying to write it, my hands are shaking so badly that the ice in my glass of scotch keeps clinking hard against the crystal every time I lift it to my lips. I didn't want to relive this memory. Honestly, I'd much rather keep it buried in the darkest corner of my mind, where it's been hidden all this time. But my psychologist suggested that writing it out might help. So here we are. Let's get this over with, so I can finish this bottle and hopefully pass out, at least for tonight. As usual, I'll start with the focus of my research and the location. I was in the small Brazilian town of Anima, preparing for a deep expedition into the Amazon rainforest. This time, my subject wasn't a mythical creature or a folkloric legend. It was the giant anaconda. There isn't really much lore surrounding the giant anaconda in the cryptid sense. It's not a creature of legend in the traditional way. The debate surrounding it lies more within the scientific community. Whether or not the green anaconda can grow to truly massive lengths, as some historic accounts claim. There have been reports going back centuries of anacondas reaching lengths of up to 50 meters. If these claims are true, we might be dealing with an undocumented subspecies, or perhaps an extraordinarily aged individual of the known green anaconda species. Either way, very little data exists on these creatures in the wild, especially at the extremes of size some have claimed to witness. My team for this expedition was composed of 6 people, including myself. There was Gabriel, the head guide and survival expert, Bruno, the boat captain, Fernandez and Paulo, part of the crew, and Jody, my partner. Now, if you've been following my stories, you might be wondering, didn't he say he always works alone? And you'd be right. For the most part, I do. But once, just once, I had someone with me who shared my passion, someone who understood why I do what I do. That person was Jody. And yes, Jody was more than just my research partner. We were partners in every sense of the word. But this story, this isn't about how we began. This story marks the end. Our great expedition kicked off from the docks of the small town of Anima. The plan was to travel the river for a week or two, anchoring at various points along the way where we could head into the jungle in search of information and maybe even sightings related to the giant anaconda. The first few days were incredible. The Amazon, especially the deep interior, is like nothing else on Earth. Being surrounded by such raw, untouched beauty, knowing there isn't another human soul for miles, it's oddly liberating. The air is thick with life and everything feels alive. The crew quickly earned my respect. They were some of the most humble, kind-hearted people I've ever had the pleasure of working with, especially given the struggles they'd faced in life. Bruno, our boat captain, had grown up in an orphanage and never knew his biological family. He'd lived in poverty his entire life, and yet the way he treated his crew like brothers made it clear that even if he didn't grow up with family, he understood exactly what it meant to be one. Over the first few days, we made 2 anchor stops, but found no trace of anacondas in the surrounding areas. Then came our 3rd stop. We hiked deeper into the jungle this time, and that's when we finally got our first real lead, a freshly shed skin belonging to a reasonably sized green anaconda. It wasn't the giant we were hoping for, but it was a start. Jody and I set up equipment to analyze the skin sample, while Gabriel ventured off to see if he could track the specimen based on nearby impressions. As I focused on the testing, I heard a dull thump behind me. Turning quickly, I saw Paulo's unconscious body crumpled on the ground. I didn't even have time to react. A sharp sting shot through my arm, followed by a sudden wave of nausea and disorientation. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and then nothing. When I came to, I was inside a crude wooden cage, not much bigger than a drunk tank you'd find in a backwater police station. The construction was primitive, rough-hewn timber and vines lashed together, but solid. Inside with me were Jody, Bruno, and Fernandez. Paulo and Gabriel were nowhere in sight. Jody was huddled in the corner, sobbing uncontrollably, completely inconsolable. I rushed to her side, trying to comfort her, trying to make sense of what had happened. Bruno sat frozen, staring blankly ahead, his face a mask of shock. And Fernandez? He was pacing the cage like a caged animal, tears streaking his cheeks, fists clenched, radiating a fury so raw that I prayed I'd never be on the receiving end of it. Something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Bruno was mumbling to himself, barely coherent. He was alive the whole time. Oh God, he was alive. I finally managed to get his attention, asked him what had happened. He looked at me, eyes hollow, and began speaking in a flat, monotone voice. When you and Paulo went down, a group of tribesmen ambushed us, spears to our throats. We had no choice. We followed them. Gabriel was out of sight by then, already off tracking, so they didn't see him. They dragged you and Paulo behind us through the jungle, straight into their camp. When we got there, they threw the rest of us into this cage, except for Paulo. Bruno paused, his eyes flicking upward as if reliving it. Then he continued. They had other plans for Paulo. They pulled him toward a large stone slab and tied him down. One of the tribesmen, tall, wiry, with paint across his face, pulled out a crude, primitive knife. Not clean, not sharp. He slid it just under the skin of Paulo's forearm, and the second that blade touched him, Paulo woke up screaming. Bruno's voice cracked now, but he pushed on. Do you know how long it takes a man to die from being skinned alive? I didn't, but I do now. Those screams, they didn't stop. Not until they were halfway up his chest. Not until there was barely anything left of his voice. He broke then, shouting through gritted teeth, I raised Paulo and Fernandez as my own. After that, he collapsed into himself, sobbing, shaking, then fell silent again, lost in that shell-shocked stare. I wish I could tell you that was the worst of it, that the horror ended there, but I'd be lying. They found Gabriel sometime later. Obviously after they'd taken us, but unlike us, they didn't put him in the cage. They took him straight to that same slab, the one still soaked with Paulo's blood. And this time, I was awake. I saw everything. And honestly, I think I would have preferred being unconscious. At least then I wouldn't have seen it. Gabriel fought. He fought like hell, screaming and kicking as they forced him down. He never blacked out, not for a second. Finally, they managed to bind him. That same tribesman from before, Bruno had pointed him out, stepped forward with that same knife. But this time, it wasn't skinning. This time, the man brought the blade across Gabriel's abdomen in one deep, brutal slash. And then they fed. 4 of them surrounded the slab, pulling out Gabriel's intestines while he screamed and gurgled on his own blood. They were clawing at him, ripping, tearing, slurping, devouring him alive. The screams went on for 5 minutes. My vomiting lasted for 10. When night finally fell, I thought we might get some relief, some moment of peace, but it never came. Around midnight, 6 tribesmen approached the cage. They grabbed Jody. I fought. God knows I fought, but it only earned me a stone to the side of the head. And then darkness again. I came to maybe 10 minutes later, head pounding with a blinding headache and a fire raging in my chest. The rage, it was all-consuming. One of the 6 tribesmen who had come to take Jody had clearly stayed behind to keep guard, probably because Bruno and Fernandez had grown hostile while I was unconscious. And then I heard it. Jody screamed. I snapped. The tribesman was just within arm's reach. I grabbed him by the head and slammed his skull into the wooden cage door again and again and again. Something had taken over me. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't in control. I just kept going until the door cracked, splintered, and finally gave way. Jody was still screaming. The three of us, Bruno, Fernandez, and I, grabbed what we could from the fallen tribesman, a spear and 2 crude knives. I took one of the knives. I didn't want distance. I didn't want mercy. I wanted to be close. I wanted them to feel it. I wanted to make them suffer. We followed the sound of Jody's screams to a tent. Outside stood another tribesman, mid-urination, completely unaware. Fernandez didn't hesitate. He drove the spear clean through the man's chest, lifting him off the ground with the force of the blow. Then we went inside. 4 remained. Bruno took 2 down with brutal efficiency, clean, focused. Fernandez went feral, beating another man to death with his bare hands and the butt of the spear. And me, I found him, the one who had killed Paulo and Gabriel. He stood over Jody, who was in tatters, barely conscious. I saw red. I charged. The knife plunged into his gut deep, but snapped off on impact. That didn't stop me. I grabbed the wound with both hands and tore, ripping flesh, muscle, and sinew, opening him up until I could dig in and retrieve the broken blade. Then I used it. I drove it into his eyes again and again. I gouged, slashed, screamed, and I can't go on. I'm sorry. I can't describe the rest of what I did. It's burned into my memory already. That's enough. We escaped after that. We survived. But the cost was more than I expected. That night changed me, not just because of what I witnessed, the horror done to my group, to the people I trusted, but because of what I did. Because I saw a side of myself no person should ever see. I realized then, there's a darkness inside me. And that's the part I've never been able to forgive. That darkness cost me, Jody. It cost me my passion for this work, for exploration, for discovery. I fell into a very, very dark place for a long time. So this might be the last entry in this series, or at least the last for a while. Writing this has been harder than I expected. Draining. Painful. I need to close the bottle now and hope for a few hours of numb, silent blackout. But before I go, I reached out to Jody. The Encounters of a Cryptozoologist, Omizena. Darkness is a terrifying thing, not just the absence of light that spooks children at night, but a deeper, truer kind of darkness. That may sound strange, maybe even confusing, but let me explain. I've had one real encounter with true darkness. And I don't just mean no light. I mean no sound, no sense of direction, no grasp of reality. A void filled with something unknown, something dreadful. This story is about that encounter. Sometimes I get lucky during my travels and catch wind of local legends, ones that aren't on the internet, aren't in books, aren't spoken of outside small, tight-knit communities. In a world where it feels like every answer is a click away, stumbling onto a story the internet can't explain is like finding buried treasure. Yes, it's a bit cliche, but I mean it. It fills me with the kind of excitement kids feel on Christmas morning. So let's begin. I won't mention the name of the town out of respect for the villagers' wishes. They asked me to keep this one quiet, local. I won't even use names this time. What I will say is that I was in a small, secluded town in Madagascar when I heard this legend. As always, I'll first share the story and then talk a bit about the research subject. The guide I'd hired told me the tale in his own theatrical, almost reverent tone. Omizena is the name of the creature. No one knows where Omizena came from, but it is agreed it is not of good. They say Omizena was once a woman, but once can be a very long time ago, my friend. Omizena was beautiful. Maybe still is, but no one has seen her in many years. She feeds on fear. And tell me, what's more fear than the unknown, my scientific brother? You understand that better than most, I think. How do you feel when you do not know something, when your senses betray you, when you cannot see, cannot hear? That is Omizena's gift. You cannot sense her, you cannot prepare. She is nothing without darkness, but within it, she is everything. To say I was intrigued would be an understatement. I had to see this place for myself. I did what anyone with my level of dangerous curiosity would do. I insisted he take me there. At first, he flatly refused, saying he wouldn't go anywhere near her territory. But as I continued stacking money onto his payment, his resistance started to crack. Eventually, reluctantly, he agreed. The trek through the jungle was uneventful, peaceful even. But that changed the moment we neared the place the locals claimed was hers. The guide stopped. "Well, are we going to continue?" I asked after watching him stand there in silence for a couple of minutes. He didn't look at me when he replied. "No, brother, this is as far as I go." I frowned. "I hired you to guide me. I don't know my way around this jungle." "I will wait here, my brother. Her territory, it lies within that cave." He pointed toward the cliff face to our right, where a small, jagged opening protruded from the rock like a mouth frozen in mid-breath. And here's where my stubbornness, and let's be honest, my stupidity, stepped in. I figured I'd already come this far, and my curiosity was chewing at me from the inside. If he wouldn't take me in, I'd go in on my own. Despite my best efforts to change his mind, the guide stayed put. Reluctantly, I turned toward the cave and entered alone. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was freezing. Now, I've explored countless caves and jungles across the world, and one thing they all have in common, they're hot, stuffy, humid, thick with stagnant air. But this place felt like a walk-in freezer. My breath fogged in front of me as I pressed forward, flashlight in hand. The narrow tunnel, barely 3 feet wide, wound inward for a while before opening up into a massive chamber. And I mean massive. You could have fit a football field inside it, maybe 2. It was vast, the walls disappearing into darkness beyond the beam of my light. I stepped carefully, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off unseen stone, and began making my way toward the center of the cavern. That's when I saw it. A flicker, a shadow, just for a second, darting along the far wall. Quick, too quick. It wasn't a trick of the light, I was sure of it. And like the curious fool I am, I headed straight toward it. That's when I heard it. A giggle. Not the sinister kind you'd expect in a haunted cavern. No, it was soft, feminine. The kind of giggle that might normally make me blush. The kind that tells you the girl you're talking to finds you charming, that she's into you. Only this time, it chilled me to my bones. After the giggle faded, my flashlight began to flicker, blinking on and off like the battery was dying. That didn't make sense. I always replace all my equipment's batteries before an expedition. Always. Then the light died completely. And that's when I noticed something even more unsettling. Silence. True, oppressive silence. My footsteps no longer echoed across the cavern like they had just moments before. Even my own panicked breathing, deep, heavy, rapid, made no sound. It was as if the air itself had swallowed all vibration, like the world around me had ceased to exist. Then I heard her, or it, whatever Omizina truly was. I didn't have a doubt in my mind anymore. I had found her, or maybe she had allowed me to find her. "Aren't you a cute new toy?" she whispered, her voice curling around me like smoke. It's been so long since I, the cat, had a mouse to play with. Terror clutched my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something. But despite the storm of adrenaline coursing through me, I stood rooted in place. A part of me, foolishly, still wanted to understand her, to know what she was. "You are different," she said again, this time with a note of curiosity. "Not like the other cattle that wander into my lair. I sense something in you. What it is, I cannot say." For the first time, I felt like the one being studied, observed like a specimen under glass. My patience snapped. "What do you mean you sense something? Tell me!" I shouted into the darkness, but there was no direction to her voice. It wasn't in front of me or behind me. It came from everywhere, as if the cave itself had become her mouth. "Hush, child," she said calmly. "Let me concentrate. Let me study." And that's when I felt her. A smooth, warm hand brushed my cheek, soft and gentle. For a split second, I felt peace, security, like I was being comforted. But then reality crashed back down. I remembered where I was, what was happening, what was touching me. That was it. I couldn't suppress the primal urge anymore. Fight or flight kicked in, and flight won, decisively. I turned and ran as fast as I could, blindly sprinting in the direction I hoped was the tunnel entrance. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, let alone where I was going. But I ran anyway, driven purely by terror. In movies, the hero always seems to miraculously find the exit in moments like this. But this wasn't a movie. I slammed face first into the cave wall at full speed and everything went black. When I came to, I was lying at the entrance of the cave. The guide crouched over me, concern written all over his face. Blood was dripping down from my nose. I'd run full speed into a stone wall, and my broken nose was the proof of it. His version of events went something like this. "Thank the spirits you're not dead, brother." That would have been a very difficult thing to explain. What happened? Well, I was waiting outside the cave entrance when I suddenly heard this screech. And I mean, wow, you've got a set of lungs on you. Not the most manly sound I've ever heard, but hey, it let me know you needed help. Against my better judgment, I went in. I found you collapsed just past the entrance to that big cavern, all banged up and bloody. So I dragged your sorry self out, and now here we are, my friend. Here's where things get interesting. I'm not claiming to be the bravest man alive, but I do have a very deep voice. It's physically hard for me to yell at a high pitch. Pretty sure I didn't even scream in the cave, just shouted, "Oh fuck," and took off running. At least that's what I remember, though I did hit my head hard, so I won't pretend my memory is ironclad. But something doesn't sit right. I believe what my guide heard wasn't me. I think it was her. Oh my Xena. I think she screeched because I ran. Because her interesting new toy decided he didn't want to play. And that disappointed her. But there's one question that's haunted me ever since that day. A question I can't shake, no matter how many expeditions I go on or how many legends I try to unravel. What did she sense in me that made her so curious? The Encounters of a Cryptozoologist, Black Shuck. Now, I'd like to share one of my very first encounters with something I can only describe as the Black Shuck. This was one of my earliest research projects, undertaken right after I finished college. I was still just a fresh-faced, idealistic young man, eager to shine a light into the shadowed corners of our world. I had no idea that this experience would be the first to truly shake me to my core, making me question, for the first time, whether I was really cut out for this line of work. Now, I know I've said that more than once in my stories, and I'm sure I'll say it again. But you have to understand, as much as I love what I do, witnessing the impossible again and again has a psychological toll. Seeing things that shouldn't exist does something to you. It rewires your sense of reality. And no matter how grounded or strong-minded you think you are, this work has a way of exposing your weak points. And trust me, I've never claimed to be the strongest mind to begin with. Because this was one of my first field assignments, I chose a creature that was well documented, something familiar, something that had been reported enough times to seem almost grounded in folklore and semi-legitimacy. That creature was the Black Shuck. Many of you who followed my stories and left comments clearly have at least a passing interest in cryptozoology, so I'm going to assume some of you are already familiar with the legend. The Black Shuck goes by many names: Death Dog, Hellhound, Phantom Dog, but those titles can apply to many similar cryptids around the world. The Black Shuck, specifically, is a defined creature believed to haunt the coastlines and countryside of East Anglia in England. As always, before diving into my personal encounter, I'll first share the version of the legend I was told, directly from a local in the village of Wrentham, where I conducted my research. The black shuck ain't something you should be messing with, son. It's real, and it's dangerous. People like to call it a dog, but that's just because they've never been close enough to really see it. Sure, it looks like a dog from a distance, but once it's near, dog is the last word you'd use to describe it. It's a manifestation of pure evil. Eyes red as blood, fur blacker than any night you've ever seen. Some folks like to say it's the devil's helper or an agent of hell, but I don't buy into that religious talk. No, it's not serving anything. It's just evil, plain and simple. A kind of evil that the world spat out for no reason, no cause, no purpose but to exist, to be evil. That's it. And don't listen to those who call it a death omen either. That's crap too. You know why? Because I saw it myself, back when I was about your age. I'm still here, aren't I? Didn't lose anyone either. Not that year, not the next. But I'll tell you what, seeing that thing, it was the most terrifying moment of my life. Still is. He paused there, looking off toward the horizon like he was trying to block the memory out. Sorry, lad, he muttered. I don't want to rehash that. But after a fair bit of pushing, hassling, and more than a little nagging on my part, he finally gave in, reluctantly. And when he did speak, it came out coated in fear and something deeper, darker, rage. Jesus, boy, if I tell you, will you shut the fuck up? Yeah? Fine then. I was a young lad just like you are now. At this point, a shadow seemed to pass through his eyes. I had just gotten back from the war. I'd seen things, gruesome things, but I hadn't flinched, hadn't let it get to me. I was happy to be home, walking a forest path I'd taken hundreds of times before. It was nighttime, but nothing I hadn't handled before. Then I heard it, branches breaking behind me. The war hadn't broken me, but it sure made me jumpy. So I kept walking, listening carefully, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. When I was sure of the direction, I spun around, quick as anything, and saw nothing. Bloody nothing. I figured maybe the war had done more damage than I thought, so I kept going. But then I heard it again, this time in front of me. I could see where the noise came from, but again, no source. That's when the dread set in, that gut feeling something bad was about to happen. And then came the growl. Not a dog's growl. No, something deeper, darker. Something I can't even put into words. And even after everything I'd been through, I froze. I've been shot at and never froze. But this sound, it just rooted me to the spot. I couldn't have moved to save the Virgin Mary herself. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together and turn around. God, I wish I hadn't. There it was, a dog. No bigger than a German shepherd, but its eyes, the color of blood. And I felt something cold settle inside me, like everything good in me was being twisted and corrupted. You know what I did, lad? I pissed myself and ran. But there's one more thing. Just behind that beast in the trees, I swear I saw the silhouette of a woman. I can't say for sure, fear will make you see things, but it was there, or seemed to be. To this day, I still see those eyes when I close mine. They've haunted me for decades. So, if you want my advice about the black shuck, take your rich little arse, hop on your family's jet, and piss off. Maybe you're chasing it now, but I promise you, it'll ruin you. This is the part where I wish I could say I listened to the old man, took his advice and pissed off. But I didn't. And I'd love to blame it on being young and reckless, but that would be a lie. Truth is, even now, I'd still make the same choice. It's just who I am. So after finishing up my talk with the old man, I headed to the place he told me about. I arrived right as the sun was beginning to set. It was about an hour's drive out of Rentham, a beautiful forest hugging a rocky coastline, with a narrow trail winding its way through. And let me tell you, I've been to a lot of places, but this one, absolutely breathtaking. And the best part, no hike, no trek, just a short drive, and you're there. I started my walk into the forest, following the path. By now, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and I was navigating by flashlight. The forest wasn't particularly dense, but something about it made me feel boxed in. like the trees were leaning closer with every step. That's when I heard it, a single footstep. I froze, told myself again and again, you're just hearing things. But saying I was scared wouldn't even begin to cover it. It was a deep, raw fear, the kind that grabs you by the gut and won't let go. I turned around slowly and there it was, a fucking red deer. I couldn't help but laugh, but realizing I'd let the old man's story get in my head. I thought, if I want to be a professional, I need to hold it together better than this. The deer, spooked by my sudden burst of laughter, bolted off into the trees. I took a breath, got myself back under control, and turned back toward the path. And that's when I saw it. 20 feet ahead, right in the middle of the trail, the black shuck. We stood there, staring at each other. Or rather, I stood frozen in shock while it looked through me. I can't quite explain what those scarlet eyes conveyed, only that it didn't feel like I was looking at a beast. It felt like I was the one under observation, studied, analyzed, not for curiosity's sake, but with an intent far more sinister, like it was trying to figure out exactly how to make me feel the full weight of dread the world has to offer. Time seemed to stretch endlessly while it examined me. Then it let out a howl, sharp, agonizing, and otherworldly. In the midst of that howl, I swear I heard something else, a soft, feminine whisper, delicate yet laced with menace. Interesting. And then the creature vanished into the darkness, leaving me paralyzed in stunned silence. These stories I tell, they've become more of a therapy than any real attempt to document my research. That creature, that encounter, I never tried to publish anything about it. I've rarely spoken of it to anyone. And the reason is simple. I can't properly explain it. Because when I looked into the eyes of that thing, I didn't just see danger. I saw pure evil. But not the kind of evil you read about in scripture, not devils or hellfire. No, this was something older, deeper, a force without logic or goal. Not malevolent for a reason, but malevolent simply because it is. This kind of evil isn't discussed. It isn't studied or written about in literature. And I believe that's because it can't be. Sitting here trying to put into words what I saw that night, it's impossible. Language fails it. Nothing I write, nothing I say could ever do justice to the reality of what I faced. All I can say is this: it exists, and it must be avoided at all costs.